Hi everyone, thank you very much for joining us. I'm very pleased to be back on air for this month's Medcan online seminar, How to Feed Your Family Promoting Healthy Food and Behavior in Children and Teens. We hope you all had a wonderful summer and perhaps you're still enjoying the summer weather that we're having now, and we're just so happy that you're back. We have so many online seminars on our YouTube channel and available at medcan.com. Medcan Insights, and today we have an incredible session for you today. So thank you so much for joining. My name is Tanya Haas, and I am the in-house health and wellness writer here at Medcan. And before I introduce my lovely colleague today, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. So this presentation is being recorded and will be made available at medcan.com under Medcan Insights. There is the option to join us only by audio, and all that information was in your registration email that you received when you signed up for this. Now, regarding the audio, due to the volume of participants we have online and on the phone today, we will be muting all incoming audio to ensure clarity. That being said, if you do have questions throughout the presentation, and some of you did send your questions ahead of time, thank you, you can fill your question right here at the bottom of your screen. There is a section where you can submit your questions, and the presenter and I will be able to see those throughout the presentation, and should there be time at the end of our session, we will address as many of those as we can. And please note, they will remain anonymous, and we may not be able to address all the questions today. Finally, the information in this online seminar is for educational and information purposes only, and is neither intended to be relied upon nor to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Now, with all that being said, I have the great privilege to introduce our presenter today. Stefania Palmeri is a registered dietitian here at Medcan, and she has a passion for nutrition education and counseling, and I have had a pleasure of working with her for several years, so I've seen this in action. She obtained a Bachelor of Applied Science in Nutrition and Food and a Master of Health Science in Nutrition Communication from Ryerson University in 2012, and she completed dietetic internship at North York General Hospital in Toronto. Now, while in her studies, Stefania had the opportunity to design and complete 2 research projects. Along with her research partner at North York General Hospital, she studied the rates of nutrient deficiencies in children with autism and bowel issues. And as a master's candidate, she continued to focus on pediatric care, examining the way nutrition messages are communicated in children's storybooks. She is a member of the Dietitians of Canada and the College of Dietitians of Ontario. So as you can see, she is the perfect presenter for today's session. So with all that, I am very honored and pleased to present the microphone over to you, Stefania.
Thank you, Tanya. Glad to be able to join you this time around for a monthly webinar. Today, I want to cover some of the basic principles I recommend for feeding families, including the division of responsibility, addressing the picky eaters in your household, and establishing healthy food behaviors. So let's get started. Take a look at this photo. Very idyllic, isn't it? Most parents dream of having a beautifully plated 3-course meal. The kids are bathed, food is delicious, they're all eating together and enjoying a meal. In truth, many families report to me that they often feel like they've walked out of the second picture. Mealtimes may feel like battles. You're rushing to feed the kids, get them bathed and in bed, and eventually you might get around to a cold grilled cheese sandwich later on in the night.
That's definitely familiar.
Definitely. Before we jump into the content, I want to reassure parents and caregivers listening that there is no shame if you feel like you identify with that second photo. The truth is, picky eating and mealtime concerns are very common. In fact, there are over 4 million hits on Google if you searched picky eaters.
Wow.
So you're not alone. What this webinar is here to do is give you some initial tools you can use to raise healthy eaters. So let's get started here with the division of responsibility. As dietitians, the basic model we often use to establish healthy eating behaviors is called the Satter division of responsibility. This was based on the work of Ellen Satter, who is a registered dietitian and family therapist. The whole premise of this concept is that in any relationship, there are always 2 sides. These 2 sides must work together to create synchrony. And provided that each individual fulfill their responsibility in the relationship, then the feeding environment is positive. When individuals cross over into territory that isn't theirs, this is when we start to see feeding issues arise. For example, parents are only responsible for providing when food is offered, where it is offered, and what type of food is served, essentially creating the food environment. Children are responsible for deciding if they want to eat at all and how much they have. This is the ideal dynamic. So let's take a look at when things cross paths. For example, I've seen children that may refuse to eat chicken at dinner, but suddenly are hungry for goldfish crackers before bed. This is an early behavioral feeding issue. The child is trying to take on a parent's responsibility, which is to determine what food is offered and when. In one of her articles, Ellen Satter really put this nicely, and she described it as a child's attempt to individuate, essentially become their own individual, stand on their own 2 feet, and act as a separate person. So for this reason, they may become oppositional, and they really depend on limits from parents to help support their development. Okay, let's turn the tables here. Let's flip sides. And oftentimes we see concerns from caregivers around their child's weight. Maybe a parent is concerned their child's too thin or too heavy. At meals, well-intended family members may make comments such as, well, just finish your plate, you're almost done, 2 more bites. Or, you know, I really think you've had enough now. This too can set up a child for behavioral feeding issues. Only a child can decide their internal hunger and fullness cues, and overriding this signal can either lead them to feel really anxious around eating because they will have food pushed on them, or they may feel embarrassed to eat as they're still hungry but food is restricted. Ellen Satter notes in her research that if we consistently overlook, ignore, or overrule these cues coming from children, children never learn to experience and trust their own reality. They essentially learn to regulate their feeding based on the interaction with their parent. There are some additional basic ground rules that we also have around meal times to support this division of responsibility. So first and foremost, we definitely want to create a pleasurable, non-pressured environment. Neither positive comments, negative comments, it's very neutral. We just sit down to eat because as humans, we require food for nutrition, and that's how we fuel our bodies. Avoid subtle pressures like asking your child to try 1 bite, or you must have, let's say, a bite of broccoli before you have a bite of bread. It's unfair to expect a child to sit through an hour-long meal, so an appropriate expectation for meal times is about 20 to 30 minutes, and we highly encourage families to avoid all distractions at meals. So it might be very easy to have Dora the Explorer app running on the iPad just to make sure that they get in a couple more bites, but we want to avoid this as much as possible. Focus on eating mindfully and paying attention to if you're hungry or full. This applies to parents and caregivers as well. Encourage self-feeding when possible. And this last point is probably the toughest of them all. Be as patient as you can. I can imagine working parents and families in the home, 10, 12-hour work days, long commutes can really limit our patience at meal times. And so it's very easy to throw your hands up and say, forget it. You know what? Just have the chicken fingers. At least I know you'll get something in your stomach. But it does take time and consistency for behaviors to change.
So this looks, so wonderful on paper and in this slide, but, my own experience with my friends' children and with my family members, it's a battle. And, does this really work? It's wonderful in theory, but does it really work?
I can say with certainty, Tanya, that your skepticism is normal, and many families I've worked with also have felt the same. But in truth, there is proof both in theory and in practice to say that this works. Take, for example, the Nourish study. A team in Australia took almost 700 new mothers with infants about 4 months old, and they put them into 2 groups. The first group was given guidance on feeding strategies from a dietitian and a psychologist. Things, for example, like identifying your child's hunger and signal cues, how to respond to them appropriately, etc. The other group was simply given access to a local community health service and could seek advice if troubles would come about. When they tracked both sets of children by about 2 years of age, those mothers that had received training had children with improved responsiveness to foods, better fullness or satiety, they were less fussy, and they had less signs of emotional overeating.
So that's if you follow Ellen Satter's advice, you know, let them feed themselves, give them 20 to 30 minutes, all those things that you gave us in the previous slide, that following this Nourish study was kind of suggesting if we followed that method, it would work?
Correct. So they took elements of Ellen Satter's division and they basically put it into very general guidelines that the families could follow. And what it goes to show is that early intervention can really make a big difference. So instead of battling a picky eater at 8 years of age when you start to have concerns, we can really set up a child for success early on in their life.
But how do we know if they're eating enough?
Right. So we're going to get to that in a future slide, but definitely a great question. What I also wanted to show here with this real life testimonial was an experience I had with a parent, and this parent's allowed me to share the quote anonymously, so thank you. But here's an experience we had together. So she writes, "I know it is early days, but our appointment helped so much already. S has tried strawberries twice, and he has been explaining to the family what we talked about. I think it makes him feel good teaching the family about nutrition. We moved his dinner to 4 on Saturday and Sunday with no snacks during the day, and he ate better than I have ever seen. He did, however, jokingly ask if I was trying to kill him when I denied him snacks." So this little guy's about 6, 7 years old, and he's quite the comedian. But it just goes to show you that even a minor change in reestablishing that dynamic where parents dictate the meal timings and what's provided did change his appetite in the end.
So it sounds like you were teaching a 6 or 7-year-old about nutrition because he was explaining to his family. Is that part of what you do?
Right. So we often do see children in consults, and I encourage parents to bring in school-age children and teens in a session because it allows them to become involved in the process. So what I usually cover are nutrition basics with them, such as how their plate should look, why we eat different foods, and how they impact our bodies. Sessions with parents will often go in more depth around their concerns. If they have, if they want to discuss weight, which is a very sensitive issue, I wouldn't want to necessarily discuss that in front of the child.
Nice, thank you. Should we move on?
Sure. So getting back to your question, Tanya, let's say we do get a family's buy-in. They say, great, I'm desperate, I'm ready to try this division of responsibility. Sure, now what? Now how do I know if this is going to backfire? If you are concerned about your child's growth, the best thing we can do is monitor their progress with clinicians. Physicians and dietitians are able to assess your child's growth curves to ensure they are moving at an appropriate pace and that is appropriate for their age. Cultural background, we definitely have to factor that in terms of body frame and size, and also genetic predispositions from mom or dad. How does the family carry weight and height? This second point, again, is another very difficult one, but it is essential to that relationship and is essential to any relationship. Trust is key. We really need to trust that children can self-regulate.
Yeah, that's a big one. I don't know if the child says, like, I'm done, do you really want to leave them, let them walk away from the table with their plate, still half full?
Right. So most normally developing children will self-regulate when given the chance. And I specify normally developing because there are instances when children will not feel those signals accurately, and that I'll get to later on in terms of one-on-one sessions. But perfect proof of this is how infants know to breastfeed. They know when to wake, when to feed. Sometimes they go through growth spurts and feed multiple times in a short series, which we call cluster feeds. So we've seen this proven in research as well. So I wanted to refer to this one study done by Lee et al. In 2010. And what they did was they looked at questionnaire data from parents. They were looking to see if we give a child or override the child's natural feeding method. So instead of breastfeeding, let's say we gave them a bottle, how well would they self-regulate? What they found was that babies that had been more intensively fed from a bottle in their early months were twice as likely to finish a bottle or cup versus leaving some food behind. This suggests the child may be feeding based off of external cues to finish off all food instead of listening to their own hunger and fullness signals and knowing when to stop. And it sounds silly to say that an infant knows how to do this, but it is an inherent mechanism we're born with. So no matter how tempting, if we as caregivers can step back and allow children to self-regulate, this is ideal.
Okay, so the 2 slides ago you said we need to have patience, and now we have to have trust. We're putting a lot of faith in our own children here.
Yeah, and that's why they call it kind of that feeding relationship, because as parents and caregivers, we feel like it's very one-sided, that it's all our job, but in truth, there is some responsibility for the child to learn. It's the same way that you know, you give other responsibilities, whether it's cleaning your room, or they learn that there's consequences if they touch something that they're not supposed to. So it's similar idea. You know, if they're hungry, they should eat more. If they don't eat enough, then they'll have to eat more at subsequent meals and snacks.
Right, and maybe you'll touch upon this later, or you say right here you can't go to bed hungry. So if you say that they have to eat at dinner time, they don't get snacks later, and they are hungry, will their inherent self-regulation trigger for breakfast? Will they eat more?
In my experience, I would say this happens 95 to 99% of times. There are instances, of course, if a child is very determined, they might give parents a bit more of a hard time to do this. But I find this last point is really a tough sell for most parents, and it's because it tugs at your heartstrings, right? As a parent, you love your child. You wouldn't want to see them. You wouldn't want to know that they're going to bed on an empty stomach. And so it's very hard. Oftentimes you see them go without dinner, but yet there's a bowl of cereal waiting for them before bed. So what I suggest, and when I was working in a team with a pediatrician and other dietitians, what we often did was ask parents to challenge this idea, and we looked at it through the framework that Ellen Satter presents. So, for example, as a parent, you fulfilled your responsibility of providing food, cooking after a long day, doing the groceries, making sure there were grains, fruits, veggies around the home. So you did your end of the bargain. It was in fact the child that chose not to eat, which is okay and within their right. So when children do this, their appetite tends to increase at subsequent meals and snacks, and they will learn to either overcompensate at following meals, or hopefully they'll learn to eat at that meal time and realize that the parents are dictating the time, not them.
So it's a little bit of tough love, but if they stick with the parents' schedule, they will be satisfied and satiated and so on. But it might be hard in the beginning.
Absolutely. I find, again, the more determined the child is, the more consistent.
They're great bargainers, great negotiators.
So the longer it might take, if you know that your child is very strong-willed and likes to kind of debate with you, little mini lawyers, they will give you a hard time. And some other children, you know, a couple of sessions, they'll find that they get their group, right? So that, I think, is the toughest piece, but a really important piece.
Nice.
Now, if we dig deeper into picky eating habits, there's some underlying culprits in addition to what we discussed that can draw out these behaviors. And I put in this comic, I thought it was really funny. It reminded me of some new mothers that I know. And so we all go in walking with this great intention of, you know, by eating a broad, varied diet while nursing, my child will learn to appreciate many different foods and flavors. Whereas in reality, what happened was I like two types of foods, mac and cheese.
Yeah. My friend just sent me this quote, "My kids are making it really difficult to be the parent I always imagined I would be."
Exactly. So again, getting back to that relationship, it takes work, and it's an ongoing process to equalize that dynamic. So the common culprits of picky eating, I've clustered into four main brackets that I often see in sessions with clients. So the first one is divided fronts. It refers to the idea that all family members must be consistent. So for example, if dad, let's say, is on board with the division of responsibility, you know, if you didn't have enough for dinner, off to bed you go. But grandma's waiting there with a piece of toast and some peanut butter before bed, or a bigger glass of milk, that's going to be a problem because the child will sense that inconsistency. So what I suggest is anytime we're dealing with picky eaters, get all caregivers involved, including daycares, neighbors, babysitters, cousins, etc., anyone that is providing food to the child, and we need to equalize that environment. Liquid fillers refers to basically beverages that will physically take space in the stomach of a child and trigger fullness. So overconsumption of juice or even milk will often stunt hunger, and so there's very little incentive to eat or even try new foods.
Right. I think you mentioned to me the other day, if even adults, if you drank coffee and sugar all morning, you would really be hungry by lunchtime.
Right, exactly. And that ties in really nicely to the whole sugar piece. So sugar is essentially the brain's primary source of fuel. And I know there are newer theories challenging this in terms of fats and what we can do with the body, but that's what we know to date. So whether it comes from an apple or candy, that's what the brain is looking for. When the body receives a steady stream of sugar through the day, again, it stunts that hunger signal, keeps them full, and there's very little incentive, you know, to try peas at dinner or even have a healthy snack. So as you mentioned, oftentimes even in adults we might see this where they'll skip breakfast but sip on a double-double all morning and not have lunch until 1 o'clock. And they say, I don't feel hungry, and they're correct, because the body is receiving small amounts of fuel whether you know it or not. So if you can look towards some of the sweetened products, let's say flavored yogurts, juice boxes, sodas, desserts or treats, even some of the snack food items targeted to kids, whether it's fruit gummies or bear paws, maybe we can look at healthier snack alternatives to ensure when they are eating, it is nutrient rich.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last one here, as you already mentioned, kids are very good bargainers. So they're very clever and they're easy to figure out how to escape completing a behavior they don't want to do. So whether it's cleaning their room or finishing their green beans, if they don't want to do it, they'll find a way out. So part of the family-based approach we need to take in nutrition sessions is we have to look for what escapes they're using. For example, if grandma feels badly that they didn't feel their lunch and gives them an after-school snack of chicken nuggets through a drive-through, we might need to reconsider that. If, let's say, there's a regular snacking and they know where the granola bar closet is and they help themselves regularly, maybe we have to look at moving where snacks are kept or how much is in the home. For adolescents and teens, I really do stress families also look at money. So as teens come into access to money or allowances, etc., they may be spending this money on food that you don't realize. So check their schools. If you have a food plan that you pay into and your child has unlimited access daily, is there a cap that you can set, or is it better to provide cash that they can take with them to school? So those would be 3 areas in the escapes that I often see, but there could be more in your family depending on the routines in your lifestyle.
Like if they're eating after school and then that's influencing how they eat their dinner.
Right, or you know, birthday money from a family member ends up becoming the Tim Hortons ice cap every afternoon, or convenience stores runs during the lunch hours because they don't like what the cafeteria is serving.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we know the red flags and what we shouldn't do. What should we be doing?
Right. So if you feel that you're doing quite well there and you're really just wanting to support healthy food behaviors, here's some points that I suggest you start with or continue to do. So the very first one is plan family meals. We know there is a lot of value in eating together as a family, and our lifestyles today often don't make it easy for us to do this. So we might need to, again, challenge what we identify as family meals. It doesn't have to be the 6 p.m. mom, dad, and kids at a table. Just try to ensure that your child is eating with someone, whether it's a family friend, grandparents. Eating together really helps to promote healthy behaviors as well as helps to socialize them around food. Eat together and model good behavior. So this is for all the caregivers that say, well, do as I say and not as I do. If a child sees that dad doesn't like broccoli, it's very hard to get buy-in for them to try broccoli. Or if mom can't stand chicken and will make herself a second dinner because she doesn't like what's served, the child's often going to want to mimic that. So we, again, want to get back to consistency. Connect food to feelings. It's very hard in my experience to have nutrition resonate with someone because the impact isn't always immediate and it isn't always tangible, right? So the idea of eating well to prevent a heart attack 50 years from now, it's very a difficult concept to grasp. So for children and even adults, the best thing you can do is connect it to how they're feeling. How are they performing in school? Are they falling asleep in class? Do they get stomach aches very often or complain that they feel nauseous? You know, if eating different foods makes them feel better, be sure to point that out. And then you can always explore resources that are out there if you're looking for different ideas. So for example, this book here was released by a dietitian through the Craving for Change workshops, and it helps your child identify, are they feeling genuine hunger or is it more emotional eating that they're sensing. The Rainbow Plate organization does seminars and hands-on demonstrations for kids about colorful eating and different colors in your diet. And the Family Dinner Project is also a good place for resources on maybe ideas for meals and such. What I do recommend that you avoid doing is catering to only food that your child accepts. So if your child only accepts chicken nuggets, we don't want chicken nuggets to be on the menu every single night because that's all they'll eat. So Ellen Satter had a really nice quote on her website that I thought was kind of funny, but also very true. She said, sometimes your child will get lucky, and sometimes it's another person's day to get lucky, whether it's a sibling or mom. So you can't always have your favorite foods, and that ties into the second point. We don't want to be making separate meals to cater into those favorite foods.
No, that's a tough one, because I think a lot of families think that they're really helping their children by making the separate meals and ensuring that they're getting enough food. So I guess we just have to keep returning to Ellen Satter's principles.
Correct, yeah. And if a child, let's say, dislikes a vegetable or a certain food, what we often recommend is making little changes. So you can include one new food with one familiar food. So if, let's say, they like chicken nuggets and that's all they like, maybe that night you have the chicken nuggets, but you also pair it with baked carrots. So there's something familiar that's comforting, that's not shocking, but it also helps to push the boundaries and say, hey, you know what, as a family, this is how we eat, and there's going to be different things. You can try them when you're ready. The last 2 points there are also essential in terms of approaching weight very delicately. So avoid serving portions based on weight. Oftentimes in a family, I'll see it happen where one child's very thin and one child might be heavier. And so again, the family with all good intentions will serve the thinner child more food and push seconds, or the heavier child will try to restrict. And so the messaging that we want to get across here is healthy eating looks the same for all people. If you're worried about portions and what that looks like on a plate, that's when looping in a dietitian into the conversation can help to personalize it for their growth and their, let's say, exercise needs. The last comment about making food and weight-related comments is also important. They can have very lasting effects and also create an element of shame around eating. So we want to keep the food environment positive and very open and, I guess, one of exploration. Allow the child to explore in a safe, comfortable manner.
Mm-hmm. So I guess just wrapping up, these are some, here we have some, issues of outliers or significant cases or people with have special considerations.
Right. So there are times behavioral feeding can be addressed at home with some of these points, and you'll find that your child responds rather quickly. And there are other times when an individual requires more support. So I've put some points here. If you feel that they resonate with you, it may be worth meeting with a dietitian one-on-one. Happy to meet with those of you that are interested. So if your child has had any significant drops or gains in their growth pattern, if your child's premature and has been delayed in hitting some of their milestones, whether it's transitioning to solids or textures, etc., that is also something that would warrant further support. Food aversions, if they've had severe choking incidences or phobias. Children with special needs often perceive food differently. So children with autism may sense smells a lot stronger than someone else. Or let's say children with Down syndrome may have different needs in terms of protein or calories. If you find your meal times are very negative, your child's eliminating food groups regularly, or if you're simply feeling just overwhelmed that you can't do it on your own anymore, by all means, the door is always open if you'd like to meet.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Stefania. I think we learned so much from this presentation, and it addressed several questions that were submitted, so thank you very much. Now, we do have our question period, and as I stated earlier, you can submit your questions in the box on your screen, so please submit it. We do have a few questions, so thank you very much. Now, before we get to those questions, I'm just going to read a little bit about nutrition at Medcan. So, as I mentioned, Stefania is a member of the registered dietitian team at Medcan, and Nutrition at Medcan offers 2 streams of programs right now. The first one is medical, so if you want to feel better for life, this might be the program for you. You're looking to take control of a new chronic condition rather than letting it define you. The second stream is the lifestyle stream, and this is when you want to do better for life. You're already at a healthy baseline, but you want to get to a better level. You have perhaps some performance goals, whether they're sports related or something like that. Now, all these streams, depending on the client, on the unique characteristics, are customized, and so they will touch upon different elements like digestive health, cardiometabolic aspects, pediatric nutrition, which Stefania is clearly an expert on, performance nutrition, and nutrition fundamentals. And the different programs, they have different setups depending on your needs. Each one includes a 60-minute one-on-one initial assessment with a registered dietitian, and then depending on the stream, they'll have a certain number of series of follow-up appointments and contact points, whether that's by email or video consult or in person. Now, if you have any questions, please contact our nutrition coordinator at 416-350-5949 or by email at nutrition@medcan.com. So we're going to go to some questions. And so the final question is, one of the questions is, what do you consult with young children in a session? You did touch upon this a little bit, but can you just speak a little bit more about how that goes? What would a consultation look like?
So oftentimes if a family member brings in their child, depending on the age of the child, I might see them with the parent or separately. And basically I look at the assessment as a way to flush everything out. We want to see their current meal timings, what they're having, and really identify if there are any concerns or barriers that we had brought up, especially if they're worried about picky eating. Depending on where the child or the family is at, we may look at the balance at meals. Usually, again, that's where I start, because once we base the foundations or get a solid foundation going, then we can make small adjustments to the plan to say, okay, you're having a solid breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but you're not very hungry at dinner. So what's happening in that mid-afternoon period? Or, for example, as time goes on, sometimes individuals might disclose things. So I notice my child's hiding food wrappers under his bed.
Oh, okay.
And so then we can really start to explore more of the home environment of, well, if they're hiding food wrappers, there's a sense of shame, and where's the shame and guilt coming from? Is it something that's going on at school? Is it relating to bullying? Do we need to look into involving a psychologist or the family's doctor into this conversation? So there's a whole bunch of ways it can go, but it really depends on the child and the family's needs.
Okay, thank you. Okay, this next question is, how do you handle meals and sweets around a children's birthday party? So that is definitely problematic. You're trying to do all this great stuff at home, and then off on Saturday they go to Chuck E. Cheese and they're inundated with pizza and sweets. What do you say to your clients about that?
Right. So with nutrition, and this is true of adults and children, we always try to follow an 80-20 rule. So if 80% of the time we eat well, there's a 20% margin where we can allow for some of these things. So again, especially because it's a birthday party, it happens once a year perhaps, and I'm assuming this is the child's birthday party.
Oh, no, I think they're actually saying like going to people's parties.
Oh, I see. Okay. If it's the child's birthday party, I would allow it to be in that 20% margin. Enjoy it. As dietitians, we all have our favorite things. I love sugar, I'll tell you that right now, so that's something I battle with. But if you're referring to multiple children's birthday parties, so every single weekend there's something going on, what I would do is try to set up the environment before you head out to the birthday party. So, for example, ensure that they have a good lunch or a healthy snack before they go. If a child is starving coming into a birthday party, they're more likely to have, let's say, an extra slice of pizza or a second bag of candy. If you have concerns about your child's health or what they're having, maybe speak to other parents at the birthday party. So if they get a loot bag, maybe say, okay, well, you can provide one of the treats to your child and say, we'll save these for the other weekends to come, or we can use these for our treat nights and movie night on Friday. And then again, you're taking back control, getting back to that division of responsibility. The child can determine how much, but you're still in control of how often they get it, when and where it's served.
Great. You did touch upon this, some teenagers and healthy eating habits. So what is your advice for working with teens? Does your consultation with teenagers differ from young children? And what about body image? And I know that some teenagers choose not to eat because they're worried about how they look in their jeans or how they look on Instagram.
Right. So Dr. Rosenkrantz wrote a wonderful blog post in our newsletter this month on the subject. So I'm wondering, Tanya, if maybe that's something we can also forward to our viewers today.
Yeah, sure. If someone's interested, I can definitely send that article to anyone who's interested in teenage body image. Yeah.
But I agree that we need to be very sensitive in this domain. And so the best way that we can support a healthy body image is take the emphasis off of weight and again focus on how food fuels the body. Food is fuel. We need it for nutrients. We need it as a building block to stay healthy. If you feel there are signs of disordered eating habits, so you're worried about over-restriction, binge eating, and you're suspecting an eating disorder, that is something that you definitely would want to discuss with your family doctor, pediatrician, or a psychologist. If you feel like it's more minor and they're just very sensitive about what they're seeing, again, reinforce the idea of fuel of, well, I'll give you an example. Someone that I know mentions that her daughter is very self-conscious about her legs, and she finds that her thighs are bigger than other girls in her school. But she's tall, and she's a runner. And so moms had to reinforce this idea of, we need to fuel your muscles because you're one of the top girls on your track and field team. So if you didn't have that fuel, how would you perform?
Right. I think that's what Dr. Rosencrantz talks about. It's more about behavior and activities rather than appearance. Yeah.
Because in my experience, for the majority of cases, if you fuel your body with good nutrition, you're active because you like it, not because you're running on a treadmill, because you have to burn, let's say, 500 calories a day. If you're fueling your body with the right inputs, your weight will comfortably settle to a place where it needs to be. So I 100% endorse that belief of focusing on the behaviors, and the weight will hopefully take care of the rest.
Okay. All right, this is our final question of the day. So my child recently lost 2 pounds. How can I increase weight gain?
Right. That's a bit of a tough question, just because I would need to see how the child is eating. So if it's minor fluctuations, if you find that, let's say, over a weekend they're down 2 pounds and then up again come Monday, it could just be a reflection of their weekend habits versus their weekday habits. Perhaps they're eating more at daycare, etc. If you find it's a chronic issue, though, and the pattern is starting to trend downwards, then that's something where we would intervene. So that would be a good idea to meet one-on-one to take a look at their snacks. Is there anything stunting their appetite, or simply maybe they're very active and we can fortify their meals with some extra healthy calories to fuel their bodies.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Stefania. We do have a survey, so once this broadcast is done, please, if you have any follow-up questions or queries or would like to get in touch, please let us know. We want to thank you very much for taking your lunch break with us, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.